fake news alert.
Pushing a fake news story.
For passing on fake news stories via Twitter.
The epidemic of malicious fake news and false propaganda.
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Can you state categorically that nobody...
With digital tools, it is easier than ever to create, edit, and publish your work to the world, but there's a cost. It's also easier than ever to spread misinformation, and fake news has become a real issue in recent times.
Well, the first problem that we've got with fake news is deciding what it means, what it is. We have a real problem with the definition. As a journalist, I think I know what fake news is, but other people who complain about fake news, including the president, when he complains about fake news, I don't think he's talking about the same thing I'm talking about. When I'm talking about fake news, I'm talking about things that are completely made up to look like a real news story, but it's not. When he and many other people talk about fake news, what they really mean is news that they don't agree with, or they don't care for the editorial choice to cover that story, or they don't like the importance that something is being given. Now, to me, that's a very different thing than a story that's just completely made up. So I suppose for us to move forward on what we're going to do about fake news, it would help if we'd start agreeing on what it is.
And that's what makes fake news so hard for students to spot, because we have public figures calling out news that is fake, and then there's the fake news on your Facebook feed.
I absolutely think that teaching young people how to discern fake news from real news in school would be most beneficial. I would advocate for that very much so. There's a whole generation of people who have been raised using the internet. They are not familiar at all with traditional news sources or hard copy newspapers, traditional newspapers. So they wouldn't have much of a clue of how to discern the difference between what's fake and what's real.
I think fake news is when media groups, they take real news and they kind of twist it to fit their bias or fit their audience.
Fake news. It's really been a big topic lately, and I've heard a lot about it.
Fake news is news that the media puts out there that is false. It's not based on true facts.
Fake news, that would be like something that's like they get their sources from themselves and they put it into like actual news, I would say.
It's when you see articles and stuff that are put out by entertainment websites or sources that don't report real facts.
It's really hard to decipher like what fake news really is. There's all these sayings like what people claiming what fake news is, like our president and stuff, and it's really hard to tell what actually is fake news.
We see this with students, according to a Stanford study. Only 25% of high school students were able to identify a real news story compared to a fake one. And it's only getting worse as time goes on.
How you think you could tell the difference? I think by just like the sheer what's in the content of the article itself, you can kind of tell if it's fake or not. Let's say like it might be cheesy or something, or it just could be totally off the wall.
Well, it depends on like your sources, on where you get your news from, I guess. You could be able to tell if it's like distraught, or it's messed up, or it's got way too much information that doesn't really make it seem real, like a giant shark man caught in the ocean.
I think sometimes it's pretty hard. It kind of depends on the subject though. Like you see articles on Facebook that you can clearly tell are completely made up. They sound so ridiculous and unbelievable. But I think when you get into like bigger news companies, like even like CNN and Fox News, when they start giving biased reports, that it's hard to tell between fake and real at that point.
When it comes to the general public, trusting and deciding whether something is real or fake news, the line blurs between fact and perceived bias. But for people like Devin Scillian, who have spent their entire career as a television news journalist, fake news is aggravating.
It's very frustrating. I can spend a lot of time online and on social media, or on the phone, interacting with viewers who are insisting that something isn't real or is real and want to know why I'm not covering blank.
Social media like Twitter has made it easier for viewers to confront journalists.
And a pretty good example of, there was a guy who has, I guess I'm going to use the word trolling, because it got to where I felt like I was just being trolled. It was constant barrage, complaining about two things to me on Twitter. First, fake news, that we were in just fake news. Second, he couldn't figure out why I wasn't willing to accept that there was widespread voter fraud. And I kept telling it. Now, this is something that the president has said, that there was widespread voter fraud in an election he won, by the way. But he kept saying that I was ignoring the truth. And so I kept writing him back and saying, I'm willing to accept. I'm not in the opinion business, and that's a really important point for me to make. As a journalist, I am not in the opinion business. My opinion on things is immaterial. I'm in the business of the truth.
That viewer came back to Devin with an article he said supported the claim of voter fraud.
Finally, one day, he sends me, aha, here it is from Pew Research. And I'll bet you won't report this one either. And I'm thinking, wow, Pew Research is a very respected polling organization. And if and the headline says widespread voter fraud. I thought, if they have found widespread voter fraud, I'm going to owe this guy an apology. But more importantly, this is something that we do need to report. I click on the link that he has sent, and it goes to a site that looks very much like the Pew Research site. It looks like a release from Pew Research. The same logo at the top of the page. All of the kind of things that a news release might have on it. But there was one giveaway. In the first sentence, the word million was misspelled. It said there was 3.5 million illegal votes cast in the election. Now, Pew Research doesn't make that kind of mistake when they put out a release. And I start digging into it more and more and more. The guy has sent me a classic example of fake news. Somebody has taken the Pew Research logo and invented a story and sent it around. I write the guy back and I say, well, this is kind of comical. You've actually sent me fake news. Now, it was going to take me about 4 tweets to write him back, because everything I was going to say was going to take more than 140 characters. In the middle of my second tweet, as I'm explaining this to him, he writes, I've had enough of you, you're blocked. He blocks me. I can't even finish the argument that I'm having. I so badly wanted to just... I wanted to say some things on Twitter to him that someone in my position should not publicly say. But that's the depth of my frustration on this fake news. He wanted it to be true. It didn't matter that I could prove to him that it wasn't true. And that's the real problem with fake news. It is so easy for people to buy into because it's reinforcing what they already want to believe.
Though social media offers us access to people and news from around the world, it doesn't always offer us a wider worldview.
When we're getting our news from Facebook, a lot of it's what our friends post, our family post, and they are more likely to come from same backgrounds as us. So are we, one of the problems, it's not really necessarily even a fake news problem, is are we just feeding into our own beliefs that we've already built up? And are we not actually broadening our viewpoints?
What social media has done is, instead of many of us getting our news diet from a lot of different places, we keep going to the same bowls over and over again. And so we surround ourselves really with only the stuff that we agree with. And so that becomes a pretty ripe environment for sharing things that may not necessarily be true, but they reinforce my view of the world. So I'm very susceptible to believing it.
The uprising of fake news scares me. It has the tendency to affect not just our nation, but globally, because of its ability to spread quickly through the internet. I think it's a frightening new trend.
I have heard the term of fake news a lot, but by doing this project, I realize it's a bigger deal than I could have ever imagined. But that hasn't stopped me from my goal of becoming a journalist. I think it's important that we have trustworthy journalists right now to win the fight against fake news, because without trustworthy journalists, there is no news.